Okay, welcome back to the Geopolitical Forum. The topic today is policy and posture. Is China a threat to the USA? This is episode 2 of the series Hybrid War, Clash of Civilizations. The speaker is Eric Mao. He is the founding partner of the Geopolitical Forum. He's a fintech professional turned geopolitics analyst specializing in China. And what's very interesting about Eric that's relevant to this talk is that he was born and raised in a family that had migrated from mainland China to Taiwan in the heat of the civil war between the communists, the CCP, and the nationalists, the KMT. Eric lived on one side of that history, and he couldn't wait to explore the other side after coming to the US, which he considered a neutral territory in that regard. Yet, in terms of realpolitik, the US is anything but neutral in connection with China, as the tide of history would have it for the two great nations. So Eric will spend about 30 to 40 minutes talking about what he's prepared on the topic, and then after that, the floor will be open for discussion and questions.
How about introducing yourself?
Yes, and I'm Hermioni. I am a friend of the forum, and I will be moderating the discussion.
Thanks, Dr. Zouridis. I would like to start by some remarks by the chairman of the state and general secretary of the Communist Party of China and the chairman of the Central Military Commission, Xi Jinping, Comrade Xi Jinping. So here goes. How do you guys start? Okay. Okay, the second, this one, probably 1 minute. Just give you a context, because recently we have some important thing happening in Beijing. It's just over, so let me give you a little context. This is 2 minutes. Yeah, I have to say the red carpet is a big deal, because it's a lot of message in red carpet right now. And Anthony Blinken, he went down there, no red carpet. Well, Secretary of State can still get red carpet, so he went down there, no red carpet. And Venderland, what's the name of the EU secretary, EU president? She got there, no red carpet. So there's a lot of message there. This is not just people make a big deal out of nothing. It's a big deal. And in terms of respect or what they think of you if you're important. So today's topic, like Hermioni, Dr. Zouridis, thanks for your generous introduction. And today's topic, obviously, as she mentioned, is whether it's about China's threat to the U.S. or possible or potential threat to the U.S. Right? We open to maybe there's no threat. Well, I'll present to you my case. Now the other way around, we're not talking about the U.S. possible potential threat to China, but only China to the U.S. So my approach to this is two tracks. One is an independence track. The second one is a development track. Actually, I would like to start with the second one, development track. The development track. We'll start with Obama. Well, you saw that Obama is stepping down the belly of the Air Force One with the bare stairs. He's the one. He said, if China develops like America, this planet doesn't stand a chance. Granted, he said it in the context of about global warming, climate, and environment issue, but I think it's relevant to our topic because our topic is geopolitical and economic. So if China develops like the U.S., what's the impact to the world? So it's probably not stand a chance. So here comes the threat. If China develops like the U.S., would it be a threat to other countries, especially the countries that are already there? Now there's a newcomer who wants to develop like your level. Would that be good for those countries? Would they consider it as a threat? So give you a sense of proportion about a disparity in development. China currently, the GDP is $20.85 trillion. That's based on the first quarter 2026, adjusted for the whole year. And China's current GDP per capita is $14,870. And the US current GDP is $31.856 trillion. And per capita is $94,430. So you can see China's GDP is 2/3 of the US, but China's per capita is a fraction of the US, 94 versus just under $50,000. You know why? Because China's population 4 times US population. So for China to get to from 14 to 94, it's a long way. It's a long way. This is sustainable. So let's lower the standard, because the development country, the country to be classified as the developed country, the world economists, the consensus about 25,000, between 25 to 30,000. So let's make 30,000 as a whole number is easier to handle. There's a thing called middle income trap. It's a trap that a underdeveloped country improved into a developing country, but it wouldn't be able to, it's not able to go further out to become a developed country. We have a lot of those countries. For example, Brazil, India, Turkey, South Africa, possibly China. China is fully aware of it, I'm sure, the leadership, and they don't want to be stuck there. Because the Communist Party is it's a party state. They cannot stay there and still have a legitimacy to be the sole party of the state. That's why they do their best not to stay there, as opposed to a democratic country. Well, if we lose our legitimacy, people don't like us, we lose the election, and the next election maybe we'll be able to come back. But in China's case, it's more severe than that. If you lose the legitimacy, you you lose the regime power to forever, maybe there's a revolution. So it's much more consequential. So to unstuck, China will try to export more and grow their domestic demand as well. So far, China developed to the point that it has. Its vast majority is attributed to their export. That's their model so far. They realize it's not sustainable for the longer term or far in the future, so they have started to develop their domestic demand, like stimulation or just to make boost their domestic demand. So they can 2 cycles. They don't have to rely solely on exports, because exports you meet with a lot of resistance, because some countries they don't like it. They think you're practicing trade unfairly. You're affecting their job employment or unemployment numbers. So you face a lot of issues. So they try to hedging, or it's not so much hedge. It's a healthy economy should not solely depend on exporting for their growth. So they try to do the other cycle, which is domestic demand. But we can see they just start doing it. I haven't seen a lot of success because of other circumstances. So we can see exports will still be important for the foreseeable future. So that means when you export, the countries that import face competition. At least their workforce, their companies will face competition. Well, the consumers like it because competition between companies, consumer will benefit from better prices and from better quality. But the companies, the employment will have to work harder. So Europe, for example, they you probably heard those European countries, EU countries, or more advanced EU countries. The workers have 3 months vacation for each year, and they work 4 days a week or something. But now facing this extra competition from China, they're going to have to work harder. They can probably go back to 5 days a week, or cut their vacation to 1.5 months. So that's kind of threatens it. If I were put yourself in the Europeans' shoes, you will feel threatened. But the thing is, you don't have to. As Americans, you don't have to put yourself in European shoes, because in America, I don't think Americans are willing, or even though they have to work harder than 5 days a week now. We work 5 days a week, probably 2-3 weeks, a meager 2-3 weeks vacation each year. Americans probably can work harder than that to face competition. They just lose their jobs. We'll make American workers just lose their jobs to countries like China, right? When they have a stronger developed manufacturing sector. But China will have to keep developing to maintain a party state, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So they can't stop. And it's very hard, because let me give you a sense of proportion one more time. Even though you get Europe's GDP, which is $23 trillion, EU, if China wins big, will take over the whole EU economy. It wins big. It take full $23 trillion. The Europeans eat your EU's lunch totally. So EU will have $0 left. China will have the whole $23 trillion. That only raised China's per capita GDP to $31,321. I don't think Chinese people will be happy about it long term. Even though it's extremely hard, it's impossible, right? It's impossible to have Chinese to eat a lunch for all Europeans, all the EU citizens. They can only get to the Croatia level. Croatia is at 30,000. So at 31,000, it's impossible to achieve, but it's not nearly enough for the long term. So we'll do another one. If U.S. is China totally killed U.S. economy, they won everything. the US lunch. China's eating US lunch totally, right? That only raised the Chinese per capita GDP to $37,000, $647. That's still not very good. Okay, US is over $94,000 right now. It's not really good. That's like Lithuania's level, which is between $35,000 to $40,000. It's not really good, and it's impossible, right? So what's possible. That's even farther from good or satisfactory. Another way to look at it, the airplane sector, like Boeing and Airbus, or chip, NVIDIA, the whole sector, or automobile sector. Ford, Chrysler, or Volkswagen, or Toyota, and BMW, Mercedes. China's one big, I'd say China's one big in the whole automobile sector, chip sector, semiconductor, and airplane sector. All Chinese. That will only increase Chinese per capita GDP by $1,500. That will bring the per capita GDP to $16,000, 370 cents. That's not even developed country. That's still in the what's it called, middle income track. So, and that's impossible, is it? I know there are other sectors, but realistically, that's not doable, at least in the short or medium term. So China, the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China, will have to pursue relentless development. It's going to be like a forever, perpetual developing country, perpetual government, development-oriented government for I don't know how long. They can't stop. They stop, their legitimacy will slide away. I don't think they like to see that. So that's a threat to the US, because the US loses jobs. Europeans have to work harder and lose jobs too. That's a threat, but I would say argue it's a passive threat, because there's no one points a gun to your head. There's no violence, right? For China to export each car, let's say, someone will have to place that order. So although the end result, some people, parts of the population won't like that result, which means the governments of those receiving end countries will not like it. So they will consider it a threat, understandably, but it's the kind of threat that's a passive threat. It's not violence, it's so blunt. Right? So that's what I have to say about this development track. So it's a threat, it's a passive threat. What about the independence track? China is actually dependent on the US. Why? Because 1971, Nixon, Kissinger went to China. And then Nixon, that same year, I don't know which came first, but it must have been on his mind, so it doesn't matter which one came first. He had his mind, I want to take US dollar off gold standard, and I want to visit China, right? So he took dollar off gold standard, he has to have something else to base it on to maintain the reserve currency status, to maintain the demand for that US dollar. So he had a petrodollar arrangement with GCC states. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE just recently dropped out of the OPEC. But the petrodollar replaces gold to continue to make the US dollar a reserve currency of the world. And that's not enough. How about the manufacturing sector? So they went to China. They went to China, started a political relationship, then bring China back into the global economy. So China will be the factory of the world. And whatever China sells, whatever China buys, China sells, exports, only in US dollars. While China imports the material, the input to their manufacturing sector, and the energy they need to manufacture, to make things, also they have to pay in US dollars. So that's two prongs to maintain US dollars reserve currency status. And China was expected to manufacture low-end, low-value-added kind of goods, like cheap toys and cheap T-shirts, clothes, that kind of goods. And by doing that, China was glad from so poor they couldn't even afford their own pants, right? They're nothing to eat. They're like in the poverty borderline or below poverty, depends on which section of the population you're looking at. It's really, really abject poverty as a nation. They're certainly glad to be included into the global economy, so they have a chance to improve their fortune. But they started very low, like low-end goods, manufactured goods. And their students went to the US to study. And the best ones are not returning to China. They come to US to study science, technology, and they stay. And the youth hear those nice stories. The government will make sure everyone knows. They put it on the media. Certain excellent, brilliant Chinese students coming back from the US, from other developed countries, nice university. They contribute a lot to China's advancement in science and technology. But they put it out there because it's rare. Because the fact is, most good ones don't come back. Or I should say, don't go back, right? There's always that thing. So that's another way the US is leading China. China is dependent on the US. The Chinese people, the mind, US has Chinese people's mind, hearts and minds. When they want to study, they go to the US. When they have the ability, they have the means, they have the brains, they will go to US. They won't just stay in China. For the most part. And then institution-wise, US dominated and drive the US institution like WTO, World Bank, IMF. And China will join. China will gladly join and benefit from it. And it's US dominated, US driven. If you look at the charter, they look at the capital composition in World Bank, IMF, you look at those judges in WTO, now they're gone, it's different. I'm talking about the previous era. It's all US. And China gladly joined. They think it's a privilege. So how dependent China is on the US, right? And when China does something that the US doesn't like, it's always there. US doesn't have to say it. US can sanction China. US can, and it did, right? Turns out it did, especially since 2018. And once US sanctioned China, China is hurt. And the capital flight occurred in a grand scale when trade war started. And hasn't come back. It's like a pretty bad situation. It's aggravated, it got exacerbated with COVID. Right? It started with the sanction in 2018 trade war. Biden continued on it, and the COVID. So China really, they're not saying it, but people know they're struggling. Well, they can get by, but they'd rather be in a better situation. And when push comes to shove, it's also unspoken, but everybody knows. U.S. has the strongest navy in the history of mankind. And they're fully able to block all the chokeholds. If they don't want to punish China, they can choke China out. They can block, what's the one by Spain?
Gibraltar.
Gibraltar. They can block Panama Canal. They can block Suez Canal.
Maybe the Strait of Malacca too, because they're
Malacca, and maybe South China Sea if they can get into it. Now China's getting stronger, but those are choke points. Right? They can block Hormuz as well. So China is dependent on the U.S. China fears U.S. for good reasons. And the most sinister part, the part I really don't like to see, is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party cadres, those officials. They have personal assets or family assets in the U.S. that they stole because of corruption. They are not in the U.S. buying real estate or on Wall Street buying financial assets. See, those people, their interest is actually in the U.S., not in China. Their interest, their family interest, including those high-level military officials, those generals. So if there's a conflict to U.S. economy-wise, political, or your military, whose side are they going to be on? For example, they're not going to say, well, like a soldier, right? Soldiers, the loyalty is demanded, it's expected. You have to make it clear at all times. They're not going to say, well, hey, I have a house in California, Los Angeles, right? Like the guy just got charged and convicted corruption. One of the former defense secretary, who was a general. In China, defense secretary is not a civilian job. They have active general as defense secretary. The two of them, but I know it just came out. One of them got his son. His son got money, corrupt the money they stole, because corruption. They bought a house. He couldn't. I guess the U.S. gave him the money. Corruption. The report didn't have the details. Probably the money is from the U.S. U.S. somehow bribed the defense secretary of China. And the son was elated, calling his father, hey, we got the house, we got the money, we got the house in like a villa. It's not like a regular house. In Los Angeles. Right? So that general, when there's a conflict, he will persuade Xi Jinping and say, well, we better not take action on U.S. troops, on U.S. fleet. We're not ready, and U.S. is too strong. We should pursue peace. Because his judgment will be skewed. Because he doesn't want to fight U.S. Because U.S. gave him money. Or he has assets. Others may have assets in the U.S. U.S. can easily freeze their assets. So that's what I mean by sinister. And we all know, well, you may know, that also, let me add one more thing, because China is integrating into global economy, so the U.S. is able to tell other countries to not do business, to sanction China. So if U.S. sanctions China, and other countries will have to comply. That's called secondary sanction. Otherwise, they're sanctioned. They themselves are sanctioned. So, the first business that when Xi Jinping got in office, 2012, is his corruption campaign. Xi Jinping himself, I believe, is not corrupt. He's not corrupt, and he had very few officials to rely on in this campaign, anti-corruption campaign. But he's trying to do it. He's been doing the best of his ability, and it's still going on. Since 2012, it's not easy. It's like a systemic issue, and he had very few people to rely on. But he had to be very strong. He had to be a strong leader. That's why people call him like a Mao Zedong. He had to execute this kind of campaign. You cannot be like Wen Jiabao. You cannot be like Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin. They themselves are corrupt. Their family, look at their sons. So Xi Jinping has to be strong. You know, the side effect will be people will say, well, you're like Mao Zedong. You're not giving people enough political rights, right? So it's two sides of the same coin. But he is doing the try to undo the corruption, so China can be independent from the U.S. Of course, you say that's not the only thing, right? There are other things too. 2022, they passed a law. It's called. Let me find the name of it. I can find the name very quickly. It's a law, anti-sanction law. So if U.S. sanctions Chinese company, like recently, they passed a law in 2022, but it activated just a couple of weeks ago. They never used the law. Now it's active because U.S. has sanctioned 5 Chinese companies that did business with Iran for a long time, because Iran is a sanctioned country. They did business with Iran. Some are companies to handling money. Some are companies. Some are like they call teapots, like a smaller scale refineries to refine the oil arrived from Iran. Also, there are other companies in the process. The 5 of them. So China said, now because of this law, any company, Chinese or foreign companies, comply with U.S. sanctions against Chinese companies, will be sanctioned by us. Or the companies that are hurt can sue them. So that's another thing. Xi Jinping is trying to go independent, just like George Washington of the USA, leading the revolution to gain their independence from an empire. What other things he's trying to do? He has BRICS, because, as I mentioned, China had been gladly been part of U.S.-led institutions, international institutions. That's how China's control and is dependent on the U.S. But China now is established its alternative institution. BRICS is one. China has its own network, Belt and Road Initiative. So if U.S. try to choke China off, China have the route on the landmass. They have their own trade partners. So that will alleviate at least the U.S. sanction or choke, physical naval blockade. Belt and Road Initiative and Made in China 2025 is to improve China industry, to improve China's brand and competitiveness and efficiency. And by most accounts, they have accomplished all they wanted to accomplish and more. They actually exceeded their goals. Yeah, that anti-sanction law is called blocking order. It's not in my note. U.S. started the trade war. Now China is fighting back on the trade war as well. If you remember, U.S. raised China's tariff rate, China will retaliate by comparable tariff rate, along with other trade barriers, like they will examine your goods more. If your good is imported goods to China is food, if I tighten down my examination on the port by the customs, maybe it's too long for your good to be sellable. It goes bad, or the value declines as time goes on. That sort of thing. Or you sanction my company, I sanction your company. So there's a lot of tit for tat. That's part of it, because China said, now we want independence. We don't want to be under U.S. thumb anymore. Now we graduate from being gladly part of U.S. institution and control and their network and U.S. dollar. Now we want it on our own. It's nothing personal. It's nothing against U.S. We just don't feel like being part of it. We want to be like an equal status in this world, coexist in the world on equal status. So Xi Jinping, his internal domestic measures and international policy, all pointing to his mission to make China independent from the U.S. So that led up to the summit in the past week, Wednesday, Thursday, in Beijing. So Donald Trump said, well, we've been fighting for a while. I see what you're trying to do. So let's sit down and talk. We'll try other things. We'll try other things short of direct war between the two superpowers, which is neither side wanted it. So when you're tired of fighting, what you do is sit down and talk. That's what happened in Beijing, Wednesday and Thursday this week. So the U.S., what's critical in the U.S. is, I think you guessed it, is the reserve currency status of U.S. dollar. They cannot lose it. It's disastrous. Your retirement fund, your savings, if U.S. loses its reserve currency status, U.S. dollar will depreciate greatly. And that means all our assets, and all of your foreign assets, but your U.S. dollar-based assets will depreciate. And inflation probably will go up. So the prices are going up, and your assets are going down. That sounds like a threat to the U.S., isn't it? Threat to each one of us, a pocketbook. So also the big deal is how do U.S. government, federal government, borrow more money? How do they handle the road to the next term when the current bonds expire? How do they do that? If the U.S. dollar ceases to be reserve currency, your bond will be worth less. The yield will be higher and pay higher interest rate. And you can't sell as many. Meaning because when you sell bonds, especially to Federal Reserve, you're essentially printing money. You can't do that anymore without insurance, without inflation, because U.S. dollar is not in high demand because it is not a reserve currency. So there's a lot of problems. And the U.S. certainly can forget about being an empire. So what did they do? What did they do in Beijing this week? They brought, I'm telling you, they brought BlackRock, Blackstone, Goldman Sachs, Visa, Citigroup, MasterCard, among the other companies, Elon Musk, other technology companies. But those are financial companies. They try to open China's financial market so they can sell bonds directly to Chinese citizens. Because currently, China still has pretty strict, their capital account is closed. They have capital control. Regular Chinese citizen is not able to exchange their renminbi, which is Chinese yuan, to US dollar. So see, China is dependent on US still. So if you're a Chinese citizen, if there's no such restriction, you will be glad at the drop of a hat, exchange your asset into US dollar and put it in US. Right? That's why China needs to maintain that control. But US, American government saying, well, our budget deficit is like $39 trillion. All the countries, our citizens who are willing to buy federal bonds, they probably max out. They probably don't want to buy more because it's too much already. If it's too much, you don't want to buy more because next thing you know, maybe it's a bubble, the price will go down. You don't want to put more money in there. And more recently, I mean a year, probably at least, the government, foreign governments, Japan, Saudi Arabia, even Taiwan, and certainly Beijing, they are gradually reducing their holdings of the treasuries, probably to have gold instead. So they're maxed out too. And they see the risk of holding US dollar-based, denominated assets because you're also vulnerable. You're subject to US sanctions. And you don't want that. Look at what happened to Russia. You don't want that. So it's pretty much maxed out. So US government was like, shit, we have $39 trillion and when we have to pay like almost $2 trillion worth of interest every time all of those are due. So we got to find new sources. They go to China, in Beijing. this week. So they brought all the financial companies. Also, they have this stable coin. So if this stable coin, like Tether, is based on treasuries. Tether issue the coin, they have to have treasury in the back. So that essentially, if it go to China, China probably doesn't have to change the law. They just have to make new law. They say, we have the capital control, but we're open to stable currency. We're open to Tether, for example. So Chinese citizens, if you're a Chinese citizen, China is still dependent on the US in many, many ways. But this revolution just started. So you would be more than happy to buy US treasuries through the stablecoin, through Tether. I believe that's part of the agenda that they're talking about in Beijing. As time goes on, we may learn more about it. So the US is trying to find new avenue, new investors, new buyers for their treasuries, because it's just too consequential if the US dollar loses a reserve currency status. About 10 years ago, it was still like 65% or 62% of mid-60s% of the world reserve currencies was in US dollars. Now it's like high 50s, probably 59, 58. So it's not good. So I personally don't believe it'll collapse like that, but it will slide down gradually. And not as chaotic, but still not the kind of scenario that United States or the US citizens want to see. So my prediction is, if I make a prediction, the development track, like I said, China or Communist Party will not stop. They cannot afford to stop that track. And the independence track, I think China will eventually get its independence, so to speak, from the US. Because not because China is a threat, it's not a plus to the US empire, but the main threat of the US, the main cause that the US will have to yield their empire status is due to their overextension, also internal division and the corruption. Those are just make opportunities for China to rise up, to pursue their independence. But China is not a cause. The cause is US, their own policy, overextension, division and corruption. So I predict, of course I don't have time frame, but eventually China will get there. People will maybe, some people will say, well, China has their own problem. China does have their own problem because Xi Jinping right now, his emphasis, Xi Jinping is like a strong leader. He wants to make China strong, like what's it called, China dream. I suppose his opponents, his former premier is on the other side. He will take care of average Chinese person's income, their livelihood. But Xi Jinping was like, now it's kind of enough. We need to bolster the country's power. So he's on the demand, he's economic-wise, policy-wise, he's on the supply side. We'll build the technology, we'll build the military, we'll build, and hopefully the demand will come up. If not, we'll export, we'll use other countries' demand. So he's on the supply side, build infrastructure, build this, build that, as opposed to make sure there's enough insurance or safety net or income for the restaurant owners, or store owners, the small companies. You want to build out the large companies, the flagship companies or the state-owned enterprises, the major ones. That's its orientation. And also, so that's partly explains why Chinese economy is struggling now. High unemployment rate, like 20% among the youths. And also the real estate market bust. Those are all downside risk in the Chinese economy, at least in the short term. But in the long term, I will bet on China's going independence. I think that's inevitable because China has the energy, the population has the energy. When you go to a country, people are willing to work harder because the recent painful humiliating memory, collective memory, that drives people to work harder. And U.S. doesn't have that. U.S. has been very nice and sweet. So at this point, for Chinese people are more motivated. To me, energy is very important. And the Chinese Communist Party is able to select good policies because they have mechanism. If policy is wrong, they're willing to. Their agility to be able to modify it, adjust it, or correct it, or just kill it. Because they're one party, they don't have to face the re-election, so they can, amid fall, they can make changes. So at the same time, the Western countries, like US, European countries, they have this crusader mentality. They want to spread the gospel of democracy. They want Chinese people to have more political rights. Well, I won't question their motive, but the downside for China is, if China adopted US or the US or Western European political system, they will not have the advantage that they have right now. They will have a lot of infight, although people have the political right to infight, but that's not good for development. Chinese Communist Party is a perpetual development party. So you have, well, U.S. has its own share of corruption as well. So I would expect Chinese government will have the cause to stop the political change or evolution the U.S. way. But of course, they have their own internal pressure. When people have assets, when you make money, you want to be able to protect your assets. How do you protect your asset? You want to have rights, individual rights, political rights, so that you can protect your assets. So Chinese Communist Party will have to strike a balance. Somehow, you don't have to go with Western democracy kind of governance form. They can go in their way. But I expect them to strike a balance between political rights, people's political rights, and economic growth. So it is a threat, but it's just because China captures opportunity caused by U.S. internal issues and overextension overseas. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Eric, maybe you can explain this to me. Let me start by saying China is a great country. I think that is, nobody can dispute that. And no sane person can dispute that China is a great country. And also, I think there was how can we say it, a little problem, say, between approximately 1949 and 1971 of not really thinking maybe clearly in terms of what's the best way to run a country, but that since Nixon went to China, there was a steady trend toward China getting more connected with the rest of the world, and the Chinese population getting richer. Many, many, many hundreds of millions of people were moved from poverty to not poverty, shall we say, middle class. And that was funded really by the United States and other Western countries, because China produced things that were exported, and also U.S. companies built plants in China. And so I think it's fair to say that the West and the U.S. Included funded that rise from a largely impoverished China to a China which is, okay, yes, it's still nowhere near the GDP per person that the U.S. has, but that's looking, saying the glass is half empty. But the glass is half full because, in fact, if you look at what China was like in 1940, shall we say, compared to 2026, it's clearly much, much better. I think that's indisputable. So I'm not sure why. I mean, it seems to me you have the key yourself. You said China is relying too much on export. And the fix for that is you can leave the export there. There's no reason to stop doing that. But you want to also encourage internal development because you want to mix. You want to mix between export and domestic. And that I don't know why China would have to feel that they should, quote, fear, unquote, the United States or be under the control of the United States. Because historically, if you look at the last, 40 years or something, China has risen tremendously. So I would think if you were a resident of China, you can walk around with your head held high saying, this country has really done marvelous things. And why should we feel that the United States is a problem?
Because China wants to get to the next step and they see the headwinds, artificial headwinds from the US, their threats, and then there's real action, most prominently from 2018 and on.
But threats being tariffs, right?
Right.
What? So that just means...
sanctions on companies too, and the sanction on chips. NVIDIA chips used to 90% of the Chinese market, and it dropped to zero because of sanction.
Well, the fix for that is to build your own chip plants, which I think China's doing.
It's not easy.
Right?
Well,
I know it's not easy, but just because it's not easy doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do.
Let me share my view.
Yeah.
Maybe it takes 5 years.
Yes.
Chip is extremely hard. That's why only China is trying to do it on their own. The current chip market or supply chain is spread out many countries, including Taiwan, Netherlands, US, and Japan, South Korea. No one single country can do it. And China is forced to do it. As you can see, those other countries are US allies. If US says, Netherlands, you're not supposed to sell that equipment to China to produce high-end chips, you can't sell it because US can say, well, that equipment of yours has US software. So we have the right to stop you from doing it. That sort of thing. All the countries will turn against China, as they have, in terms of chip importing. Of course, China produces their own chip, but those are not the highest end. Those are mid-range, like a legacy chips.
Okay, so maybe you can tell me, I'm certainly not an expert, that's why I'm asking
But
you.
China, let me finish that one. Maybe that will answer your question. But China needs the high-end chip, the top line, to develop their AI. AI is it may take 5 years to get that, because now it's zero. You don't get it from the US. They try to get the second-line chips or something, multiple to put, bundled together into one to simulate the highest one. There must be some trade-off that's not as good as real. And China may get there. Huawei may be able to get there, or some other companies, a combination in Shanghai, in 5 years. But AI development, you cannot wait for 5 years. You cannot wait for 1 year, because it's a matter of the first comer advantage. If you're the first comer, you determine the governance, you determine the paradigm, you determine the platform, you determine everything. So it's critical for countries like China. Maybe Europe, they resign to it, but from Chinese perspective, if we want to break through the middle income trap, we have to develop among other things, we have to develop our science technology, and AI is critical, and chips are critical. So they cannot wait. So this time, Jensen Huang, they were starting the meeting on Wednesday. Treasury Secretary Bassett went to South Korea to meet with Chinese delegate, the representative from China, his counterpart, to negotiating. They're still negotiating. And who knows what they're talking about. But they're still hardly negotiating 2 days before Trump landed in Beijing. And Jensen Huang was not on the list. Elon Musk was, Tim Cook was. I'm talking about technology people. Jensen Huang wasn't. Isn't that amazing? And in flight, they told Jensen Huang, wait for us. Get on a plane in Alaska when we land to refuel. See, it's logical to speculate that. They're talking about something, there's some breakthrough. Okay, Jensen, come, because we want to do business with, or we want to lift the sanction or the ban of the NVIDIA chips to China. We have a deal. So he got on the plane in the middle of the flight, and he landed China. And after Thursday, when the meeting was over, lo and behold, the deal was the top line NVIDIA chip, which is H200, for 10 Chinese companies. Each one can be allowed to buy up to 7,500 chips. But subject to a restriction, which is no company can do business with Chinese military. And certainly they're not gonna, the 10 companies do not include any military companies. So they have a deal. It's so urgent. It's so urgent. They don't talk about it a lot. The Chinese don't talk about it a lot. They will tell you, all those people who are aligned with Chinese government, they will tell you, look at DeepSeek. Without top-line chip, they can still make it. And also they're able to bundle multiple slower chips to work like the top-line chip. I mean, from when you don't have enough information, you use your logic, right? Why is it so urgent for them to make a deal on that? Because they can't really do that. They can't really do a lot of DeepSeek on a consistent basis. DeepSeek probably at a certain stage you're able to do that, but to get to the next level, and the US to get to the next level as well. If you want to keep up or you want to overtake, if you don't want to lose the AI race, you gotta get the chips. That's how I'll answer your question.
I'd like to build on something that Joe said, and then I'd like to hear from Vic actually about this topic.
Kelvin has his
I'm
hand
sorry,
up too.
Kelvin. I'm so sorry. Please, after Kelvin, I'm gonna. Yeah.
What'd he do?
He bought a bunch of NVIDIA shares.
That's totally possible. But he would buy it through his, he would buy it through his broker under the name of his son's housekeeper's brother. And they will buy a share. Along with all his policy toward Iran, they will buy shares at a better timing in terms of oil prices. So
Yeah, so to me, the big gaping hole, there's two big gaping holes in this talk, in my opinion. So the one is, you have to start from ground zero, which is the financial system unto itself. It reminds me of another talk that we had in the forum where the presenter was talking about GDP and all the social ills, and it's you have to talk first about the monetary system, because it's the monetary system that creates incentives. And you show me incentives and I'll show you the outcome. So there's a very famous economist named Michael Pettis, and I used to read, he used to teach at Tsinghua University, and now I think he teaches at a different university. Mm-hmm. And he goes into detail about how the Chinese financial system works. And I cannot do it any justice, so I think this requires, and I was reading this stuff about him a very long time ago, so bear with me. But essentially, the Chinese financial system works in a way that suppresses households and favors production in factories, right?
Yeah.
And the US system, right, has a deficit. So it's not so much, and he calls the two economies two drums holding each other up. So until that basic structure changes, in my opinion, everything that you said layered on top of that, it's just window dressing to me.
True,
And-
true. I didn't, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so, and like, so I think a lot of the hand-waving comments you were making, like the Americans don't want to work and things like that, it's that the incentive structure and the Chinese work so hard, yes, that's true, but the financial system is driving that towards that outcome, right? Like, I think the Americans were up until, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago, were among the hardest working on the planet, right? Like, and I think a lot of Americans still have a lot of productive energy. It's just that the financial system creates an incentive structure that leads to outcomes that make them appear phenotypically what you're saying, but you're not really getting to like the point. So
Yeah,
I know
didn't
when I
get
made
to the
this comment before, like it got all excited about the financial system. So I'm just wondering if you have any comments about this.
Thanks for filling me in. I did not emphasize that part. Yes, that's part of the financial system reform. Because I was overemphasized, I guess, about the international part, which is capital control. Internally, you have to have financial system reform too, because major Chinese banks are controlled by the government, state-owned banks, and they favor state-owned enterprises when it comes to loans. And China used that as a leverage to direct their policy. If they want to focus on this sector, the companies, especially the main companies, the champions of that sector, will get loans, better terms, as opposed to mom and pop wants to open a shop, you get a loan, you may or may not get it.
Because anecdotally, like I'll watch like those vlogs, like a day in the life of like an office worker, or like a day in the life of like, I know this is like really anecdotal, but
it's really
they're
hard.
working their butt off,
Yeah.
like 12 hours a day, and then they're saying, okay, we make $500 a month, but our rent is like $300, or like by the way the system is set up, even though they're working their butts off, like the financial system is set up in such a way that they're not really clearing that much money. I mean, it's not all unicorns and rainbows.
I'm sure it's on the government's agenda. They want to open up financial system for every citizen. There's no reason they don't want to, because people can only put up that much for that long. Now they started, Chinese people or their parents, people who are working, their parents, they still remember from their parents' description those tough days. They came from so low, so they can put up the hardship, because compared to the old days, they're still much better off than their parents. But they're only so much they can take, for so long. They graduate college, can't find a job, or find a menial job, a job below their qualification. They can only take so much before they blow up at the government. So the government want to head that off. So that's why I have reason to believe. My research didn't focus on it, but I heard about it. That's definitely part of the reform, financial. So the Chinese development model was manufacturing, getting foreign investment, and try to foster their own manufacturing sector. And then people, especially from the outside, clamor about, what about politics? What about people's political rights? So I said, oh, we'll hold it off. We want to make people rich first. And then they put off the financial system. I think it's time to get to the financial system. I think they know it's time, whether it's capital control or internal financing, banking system. Actually, Jack Ma got into trouble. If you remember, Jack Ma a few years ago, he disappeared for 4 months, because he went to Japan, because he fell out of favor of Xi Jinping, because he mocked China's lack of financial system reform, something like that. He did something very rude from the party standpoint. And then in the open event, like a lot of people, rich people, important people, investors, he mocking Chinese government's running the financial system. And then he came back. After 3-4 months, he came back to China from Japan. He shed his title of the CEO of Alibaba, but he's still like a board member, he's still involved. And now, about less than a year ago, last year, Xi Jinping, there's an event with all the leading entrepreneurs, the big shots in the business world. Jack Ma was invited. And Xi Jinping shook his hand along with other people. So now you're a good boy now, you're okay. And we're probably gonna do what you actually initially said we want us to do. It just, you did it too rude. You were rude and you were too early. You're not sincere. If you had talked to us, we have channel for you, especially people like you. We can make something happen for everybody's good. Now we're ready for that, and you're welcome to join us to continue the development of the country. So I have reason to believe, and I also have inkling, I heard, I just didn't get into detail in this aspect.
You mentioned me. If I remember correctly, I think the thing that you brought up, whenever that was, however many months ago, might have even been last year, I don't recall. I think it wasn't just the financial system. It was more precisely, I think you brought up central banking.
Yes, yes.
That was the thing that was like, because that's the missing thing where like if you get central banking and fractional reserve banking and fiat currency that you can just inflate away to paper over, you know, poor fiscal policy, then that's an unacknowledged problem that too many people on the left, you know, they love their central banks. You know, they really love their central banks and they don't want to give that up, and so they're reluctant to acknowledge that the central banking is a heavy, maybe even primary contributor to the things that they complain about, you know, way over here. One of the things I was going to mention as a slight pushback to what Joe was saying about, you know, like, I'm gonna deliberately straw man in good humor. What you said, you know, like
that's encouraged.
What could China possibly have to fear from the United States? We're innocent little baby deer in the forest. We're not gonna hurt anybody, right?
Pandas.
You know, I think one of the things, and Eric, you know, maybe you can add to this or respond to it or push back if there's pushback, though I would doubt it, is one of the things that China really chafes at, what they really don't like, is how much financial hegemony the United States has, where it's overly restrictive to what they would want to do. You know, the fact that the United States has the sanctions weapon, you know, that, you know, the SWIFT system, and you know, you can be locked out of SWIFT and all this kind of stuff, you know, they, in you know, what they've done to Russia, what they've done to all these other countries, I'm sure China takes a look at that and says, one country shouldn't be able to do that, you know, so I bet some of the development, some of the stuff that China's trying to do is to try to mitigate the kind of financial coercion that the United States engages in, and I think that's a totally legitimate endeavor, you know. I'm sure you would agree with that, but like, that is a big part of what they're trying to do, right?
Yes, absolutely, because they try to set up their institution like BRICS. China has something to lose if the US dollar collapses, because China still holds a lot of US dollar denominated assets, namely the bond, the treasuries. So China doesn't want to see the dollar collapse. And who wants to see the dollar collapse? Russia. So when this thing was on the agenda, namely to develop an alternative reserve currency system to kind of alleviate the risk tied to the US dollar, not necessarily like displace it, but just to alleviate the risk. Russia say, we volunteer to take up the project. We're going to propose present our proposal in the next meeting in 6 months. Lo and behold, what they propose is something to replace the US. Something like going back to when 1944-43, Bretton Woods, they were discussing the post-war system. The Keynes from Britain, he proposed a system like basket of currency. Yeah. The reserve currency will be the trade currency, will be like basket of major currencies. The U.S. something, John White he proposed that what we have right now, or what we have before Nixon took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. Then, of course, U.S. won out. Well, hindsight, we can always say, well, of course, U.S. was a big shot compared to Britain. And what Russia proposed something like Keynes system. Russia has every incentive to replace. Putin want US dollar gone because he has no US dollar or nearly none asset in US dollar denominated assets. What he had, 300 billion or more, was already confiscated. So he has nothing to lose. But China and other countries say, hey, slow down. Why? That's not what we're looking for. So that thing was dead in the water. Nobody is talking about it anymore. So what I'm saying is they try to have something in parallel, not to replace. So right now, the current state is more and more countries, including trading in oil, they trade each other's national currency, like U.S., like China and Russia. Their oil trade, energy trade is either in Chinese currency or in ruble. Or Saudi Arabia took renminbi, Chinese currency, when China buy oil. Iran take renminbi. So that you can imagine, will lessen the need to have whole US dollar as reserve currency. That will weaken US dollar status of reserve currency. So that will lead to other things, for the long term. Of course, currency value has other factors. It's a variable of many variables, right? So, but that's one thing that's weakened.
Yeah, well, I think my main point, one of my main points, is that China has risen from poverty largely because the U.S. as the biggest Western, importer of Chinese goods, and the rest of the West imported a whole bunch of stuff that China manufactured, and that's responsible for raising the standard of living in China, right? So I was going to make another point. I think I've lost it. I'm saying that I think one of the things certainly that's happened is that China is now perceived as a very, very strong producer of products. And so other countries are saying, well, we want to be able to have some domestic production also. We want to be able to not lose our domestic industries. And that's part of the reason why people talk about raise tariffs or talk about raising tariffs, is because China has become so strong. I mean, I was out of the country recently, and I saw for the first time a BYD electric car. It's a fine-looking vehicle, but you can't buy them here because we have this little thing called 100% tariff on Chinese electric cars. And that's, I think, is protectionism, because we want to protect our domestic industry. So it's really an acknowledgement that China has become so good at that we're afraid at how good they are, and they're just going to be able to, we won't have domestic production at all. Now, I don't think that's true, but I think that's the fear.
Yeah, compared to how U.S. was right out of the World War II, U.S. Manufacturing sector declined, but still pretty strong.
Oh yeah,
it's just certainly relative to China. China's manufacturing output or income is a total U.S., Japan, Germany combined, and more than those three countries combined. But it's imbalanced. China is imbalanced because the capacity is built up too much, because of the policy, the model, up to the point of Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping kind of took it to the next level, because he wanted to accumulate China's reserve, like the wealth, national wealth, so they can use it on Belt and Road Initiative. He can use it to support investment bank, what's called new investment bank, those the counterpart to World Bank and the IMF in the BRIC system. He wants to be able to bolster those new institutions, so to be an alternative to the U.S. institutions. So he needs a lot of national wealth, but that's out of balance. As like his opponents, like the Li Keqiang, he was replaced in the new term of administration. He was on the opposite side in terms of economic development. He wants to take care of the little people, but Xi Jinping wants to bolster national power. Maybe the demand will keep up. If you build the capacity, the demand will come. That's a typical supply side. But it didn't come, the demand didn't come as expected because other factors, because the real estate buzz, people just don't feel secure to spend their wealth, the savings. That's why the Goldman Sachs, those guys came in, try to sell U.S. bonds to the Chinese people because, hey, you got so much savings. Oh, how much interest rate yield do you get from the bank? Right? And China is notorious for lacking vehicles for investment for average person. That's why they predominantly invest in real estate. Now the real estate bubble busted.
All right, thanks, Eric. I think we'd like to hear from Kelvin as well.
Okay. China, first of all, China prefers not to. There's a red line, which is Taiwan declare independence, changes name of the country, because realistically, the political reality is a separate political entity, but it's not nominally independent because number one, only like 12 countries in the whole world of 194 countries recognize Taiwan as a country. So in international relations, that the way it works is nothing. But the problem is, if Taiwan is emboldened enough to declare independence, say, we are no longer Republic of China, we are, say, Republic of Taiwan. And then that's a starting point. If China doesn't put an end to it, it'll be sliding slope. So that's when China has to put their foot down. Which means it's a red line. That's one condition among probably a couple of other conditions. China will use military action. Right. And another red flag is U.S. It is. Yeah, absolutely, that's number one. Number two is U.S. has troops stationed in Taiwan. That's number two. But the military action, there are different grades, if you will. They can have embargo. They can have a closing the Taiwan to nothing coming in, nothing going out. Taiwan cannot last for a week. They run out of coal, they run out of electricity, they run out of energy within a week. So that's one way to do it. Of course, another way, which is I don't think is high on China's options, military options, which is Normandy style amphibious landing. Right? That's not very high or preferable for the Chinese. But my point is that they have a lot of tools in their toolbox in terms of military. They will use it when the red line is crossed, either by U.S. or Taiwan or both. And the thing is, Chinese Communist Party, they prefer not to. It's easy to understand because if you want that thing, if it's broken, it's yours. So you want to preserve it when you try to get it. So military action is a way to break it. But if we're going to lose it, we're going to have to set an example. We rather break it than just letting it go. So that's the severity of the red line. Yeah, the multiple things they're doing.
I think Kelvin wants a timeline.
Timeline.
Like, specific.
Well, if I venture to give you a timeline, all things considered, because I consider political climate within Taiwan island and their exchange between two sides politically, economically, and the people's sentiment shifting in Taiwan, and of course military powers. I would say probably by 2035, it'll be resolved peacefully. If you, like you mentioned, China wants to wait till U.S. is weaker. That's one important variable. If they can wait till 2035, they will. If no one's crossing the red line, which is they will have other measures to prevent people even want to get close to the red line. It's part of the conversation in Beijing. Like Trump was willing to say Air Force One when he was asked the question. Did Xi Jinping ask you whether you will intervene or militarily if he made a move on Taiwan militarily. Trump said, I didn't answer it. Trump said he said to Xi. He responded by saying, oh, I don't talk about those things. This whole world, only one person knows the answer, that's me. Which is pretty realistic. Xi Jinping will ask, Trump will not tell. Because it's called strategic ambiguity. It's from day one. From the day U.S. switched his recognition from Taiwan to China. That's when it started. They established a new treaty with Taiwan. It's called Taiwan Relations Act. Strategic ambiguity is there. It didn't say, it only said we will make sure we're kind of obligated to maintain Taiwan's defensive military force by selling Taiwan weapons, defensive weapons. For if China use force, try to change the status quo, we are seriously concerned. It doesn't say we're opposed to it. We didn't say we're gonna support Taiwan or aid Taiwan militarily. It just say we will be concerned. So that's, and realistically, year after year, every time it's brought up, it's always ambiguous. We don't know, we're concerned. Until Biden years, a couple of occasions, he was asked point blank. He said, we will support Taiwan. And after that, the next day, his office, White House, immediately came out and clarified, no, he didn't mean that. Our policy hasn't changed. We're concerned. We're opposed to any unilateral change or resolve the Taiwan issue by force. We're opposed to that. But never committed to military aid.
Joel, let's hear from Joel.
And on that note, I'm afraid I need to leave. So thank you very much, Eric. Thank you.
Eric, I have a different type of question, and I think this was the second gaping hole from the talk, which is, I would like to hear more about non-idealities. So what do I mean by that, right? Like the question that we're asking is China a threat to the United States? And then there was the portion of the talk, I think you called it independence or something, or maybe it was the development one, but you were talking about all the students that are here in the United States and they don't leave, and how China participates in all these international organizations, right? I would want to know how many of those students go on to do IP theft, like what fraction of them are actually here getting educated in the universities and then actually are assets to China, right? Like, because I don't think China has there's no history of like upfront aggression on their part. Like, I don't think they're gonna come and like bomb Pearl Harbor or do anything like that, but I think it's very much within their playbook to do IP theft. There was the woman in California that was a mayor in California that just pled guilty doing something for China. She was a woman from China that's a mayor in California.
Like agent kind of thing.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So like, I don't think it's fair, or I don't think it's complete to have a conversation of whether or not China is a threat to the United States without talking about all the possible like more backdoor, like loophole sort of ways that they really are a threat and like they are openly hostile.
Yeah, that too. Among with other things, you can fill us in. You can tell us about the details that you know or in personal experience or personal observation. And I'm aware of that, but I only cover the bigger picture.
But that is big picture. Like if we want to figure out if China is a threat, I mean that because like you were going more broad about like economic stuff, and it was more like I felt the talk was more of talking about the history of Chinese growth, and it was not, in my opinion, on target enough, like all the direct possible ways that China is a direct hit and a direct threat to the United States.
Threat means, yes, it's a...
That is a threat.
Each piece, it is. Each piece, what I mean, I'm talking about a framework. Like China as an independent state, as a dependent state to the US. Well, as far as China does other things, the hacking, the infiltrating into the US infrastructure system,
to me,
electric grill,
I don't walk away from the talk.
Espionage, those are all things to come together under the framework which U.S. set out for China, will China gladly be in, which is be dependent state to the U.S. So I didn't go into like each and every one.
Yeah, but
I agree.
If I want to hear about the threat, like
I'm not denying. I'm not.
It wasn't, in my opinion. Like I would have wanted more like on target like topics about how China really is threatening the United States or not.
it is a threat, but it's more to the U.S.'s own fault. China just took the opportunity, maybe precipitated.
So then should the US government like be really, really tough on Chinese nationals, given that there's many data points of Chinese nationals doing shady stuff on US soil?
Maybe, if they have the case, they can make a case. They can do that.
Not that other foreign entities don't do that either, I mean.
Well, they can select however they want it. It's their sovereignty and they have cause to do that. And they have their legislation, they have their executive branch, they have their system to make that decision,
Yeah.
right? So,
yeah, like the other thing,
of course.
because I'm also curious because there's other stuff, right? Like there's the famous thing that's always in the news about the Chinese trawler ships, right? Like that go just in like international waters, and there's so many of them that you can see from space, and they're technically not warships, but they're threatening, right? And then they're also causing a lot of ecological destruction. So I think there's a lot of threatening stuff that China does.
They are.
That's not like upfront aggressive the way Americans or Europeans might be, but is also extremely threatening and extremely hostile, not just to the United States, but to the world.
Right.
And I think like to have an honest conversation about the threat that China is to the world, given how China operates, those things need to be addressed.
We can have individual episodes on those topics. I don't know if they mentioned, this is episode 2 of
And
the
I'm not
series.
saying that Americans or other countries don't do that stuff.
Right.
But I mean,
just
the topic is China.
Right, I'm just talking about reality, right? This is one of the episodes about U.S. versus China clash of the civilizations, and so what I'm talking about was the whole framework and the situation, and there are a lot of things go into it, like espionage and all kinds of stuff, and those are totally justify individual episode. Like you're gonna work on is the decoupling, focusing on one aspect of the China-U.S. relations. Those many other topics, and I'm glad that there are many topics. That means there are plenty of material for my series to be more rich for people to learn things more interesting. Yeah, that's definitely something interesting. I didn't focus on detail on that as well. Just like the financial banking system. I probably know more about banking system financial than the espionage situation. And one thing I want to point out, because I think it's true, it's White House policy, which is on the way out of Beijing, when they're boarding Air Force One to take off, there's a bin by the stairs leading up to the entrance of the plane for you to dump everything that Chinese officials gave you while you were here, probably including your burner phones. It's called burner phones. You're not supposed to use your own phone or the phones I use officially at home. You use the phone that's used for this trip, and you're not bring it back, because once you're hooked up, if you bring it back, hook up to the U.S. network, maybe they're malware, maybe there's some spyware. They don't want that, so they want to be clean. They want to be They want to be clean before they board the Air Force One. So yeah, it's an espionage. Chinese special can say, hey, this is your badge, okay? Vic, this is your badge, so you can follow the president around, take pictures and something like that. But there's a little chip in the badge. You bring it home. So you want to show, hey, my family, hey, I went to China. This is a nice badge that they gave to me. There's a little chip collecting stuff, or listening in your conversation, or there are other things that Chinese slip in to give to you. Oh, this is for your welcome gift and stuff. All of those things not to be brought on Air Force One.
That's hilarious.
So that's just how things are done. That's the business between nations. And espionage is one of those. Like you said, of course, all the nations are doing this to all nations.
Yeah.
But they can select China because China is the biggest
Yeah.
pure competitor.
They're not going to care if,
Reason to that.
I don't know. I mean, I think they would care if anyone does it, but
Well,
it's like,
Nigeria student, they probably they have better use of their time. But China, of course, is the focus. If they don't focus on China, on espionage, they're not doing their job.
and I think it's very telling because if I'm not mistaken, Xi is not willing to concede on having, like, reducing the number of Chinese students in the United States. I think I read that, but I have to fact check that.
Yeah, I don't have update on that. But
And Trump, of course,
a few
told-
years back,
oh yeah, it's great to
during
have
Biden
him here.
administration, he had a like multilateral, what's it called? Multilateral meeting. There's a meeting in San Francisco
Yeah.
where Xi and Biden both attended.
Yeah.
And they have a little summit there as a sidebar. And Xi took the opportunity to have a meeting with, like big meeting or maybe banquet with all the leading U.S. business people, where he offered to have 5,000 U.S. students to come to China within however many years. Well, you can imagine those things are reciprocal. So there's no reason, he would expect U.S. to invite Chinese, or at least welcome Chinese students to study in the U.S.
Yeah,
so
but
he will not take the initiative to restrain, to rein it back, right?
For sure, but yeah, but I mean, like the Chinese the China population of students in the universities here has been high for a long time. I mean,
The biggest student body.
It's not like all of a sudden she did that and all of a sudden he wants reciprocity. I mean, this has been going on for a really long time.
Yeah, I'm sure he's happy with how it is, the numbers, as long as Trump doesn't take a cleaver to cut the numbers.
Because if she's letting 5,000, I mean, the U.S., I think the number at the moment is 500,000.
Yeah,
like it's 2 orders of magnitude more.
Right.
So it's kind of one-sided, and it's I don't
Well,
know,
because that's another evidence, a piece of evidence that China is a derivation of the U.S. in many ways. Because Chinese people, no one made them go to U.S. Oh, well, a lot of them go to Australia, another Western country. China, even culturally, psychologically, institutional-wise, they're like a derivation of the U.S. They're not independent from the U.S. Psychologically, if they want to learn something, even management skill, business skill, or science technology, they go to the U.S. It's not the other way around. Very few people, Americans, volunteer to go to China to learn what's the best. Right? So that's another sign, like even psychologically, culturally, mentally, they're under the U.S. They're living dependent on the U.S. And that's not something that it's probably to your question, she probably not going to do that. But if he make every other aspect independent from the U.S., that part can be reduced on its own. But if you keep going, so be it, because they can still, there are numbers that show that more and more, higher percentage of Chinese foreign students studying in the U.S. will voluntarily go back to China, even though they're top students. They feel China has more opportunities as a technologist, scientist, better pay, better room for development, career development, as opposed to U.S., especially the current Trump administration, their attitude toward foreign students. So the more and more Chinese, so that part can be viewed as a laissez-faire kind of policy, but he wanted to fix others, like the corruption, like the other things, the trade, and less dependent on U.S. market, develop their own science and technology base, so China can be not in a lower status in those areas, especially AI. They definitely don't want to fall behind the U.S. Because that would translate into long-term dependence on the U.S. So those are the things. But as far as the brain to learn U.S. technology, actually to China's advantage, because they suffer less brain drain nowadays due to other conditions.
Just one quick anecdote. I was visiting someone in Ohio a number of years ago, like 15 years ago, something like that. And a friend of theirs came over, and I met him, and he was a guy who, I think he had like a PhD in like laser technology or something like that. And he worked for a nearby military base. And one of the things that he mentioned one time was like, there was, at one point, there was like a building across the street or something, and I think it was something like they discovered that it was like full of Chinese people with surveillance gear because they wanted to try to get like whatever information they could or whatever kind of, because the Chinese were very interested in, you know, whatever the US was doing with regard to laser technology, right? You know, and it would not just like, you know, lasers as a weapon specifically, right? And I just thought that was interesting. It's like, you know, you don't like it, but on the other hand, it's like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean? But no, I think you bring up a good point. I'm not pushing back on you at all.
It's the US's fault for not, you know, acting on that, but yeah.
And there's, you know, and it's not like China's the only country that does it. I'm aware that there's this small country in the Middle East, and I'm pretty sure that they got their nuclear technology from espionage and spycraft and things like that. I forget the name of that country at the moment. It'll come to me later, I'm sure.
New Jersey? Start with a J or something?
Something like that, yeah. I forget though. I'll probably remember once it comes.
I'm not saying that other countries don't do it, and I'm not saying it's not the US's fault for not stopping it. But the question was, is China a threat to the US, right? That's threatening behavior, right?
Sure. You know.
The other country in the Middle East, right, like, is supposed to be the friend, so it's
I hear they're our greatest friend, as a matter of fact.
So it might be not perceived as much of a threatening behavior if they do it versus China.
Yeah. Do you know the name of that country in the middle? Yeah, I didn't think so.
I knew someone, a lady intimately, and she was a Communist Party member, and she came to the U.S. about the same time as I did. Shortly after she landed, she was contacted by local consulate office asking her to collect some data at school for her.
Yeah, right.
For the consulate.
Yeah.
She said no, and that was the end of it. They never came back to bother her.
Because that was another thing I've always wondered about. Like, when all these Chinese nationals get like arrested and deported for, like, I know they're for stealing IP. Is it that they wanted to do it, or were they somehow, you know, oh, you're working at Genentech, you better, you know, steal some stuff or you're going to have a problem with us? Like, I wonder how much of it is like personal choice and how much of it is like being forced by the government.
Yeah, I don't know. It also depends on how much pressure that official, that person contact you, how much pressure is under. If it's under a lot of pressure because of the circumstances or because the field is critical or not, he will put pressure on you, especially if you're a Communist Party member. If you're an average citizen, they have nothing on you, given the system it is right now today. But because you're a Communist Party member, they can use party to pressure you, because party is another line of discipline, control, and connection. So they can use that. And that lady that I knew said no, they never came back. So depends on the circumstances. If it's something critical, if the person's under pressure himself, he probably put pressure on you. So it really depends.
Because another thing that I've noticed, and this is just, again, anecdotal, like, I follow a lot of science and engineering stuff in my feed, and it'll say, oh, prominent scientist, you know, from China, so-and-so, is returning to, they're leaving Switzerland, they're physicists, and they're returning to China because they're getting offered a really better deal, and then prominent whoever, and this has happened now in the past few months, like a handful of times, and like, I'm wondering, right, is it that they're going of their own free will, or is it that they're like being summoned home, like, you know, you're doing really important physics stuff, you know, you better get back here, or else.
Yeah,
or else.
You have to ask them, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then they will say, well, so-and-so comes back, he or she is a top scientist somewhere, MIT or whatever, and then she came back and she will lead some institute or research project, and she will contribute to our whatever.
Right.
You know, but we don't know what's behind it. You only hear the propaganda. And you don't.
Because the headline is that they're going back because they're getting such a sweet deal.
Right.
But like, is it
So other people will see, if you're a fellow student of another PhD or a scientist, you see, oh, it's a good deal, I want to consider
Yeah.
it. Even Americans, non-Chinese citizens, they will say, oh, it's a sweet deal. I'm a little tired of my Caltech boss and the environment. And China offered me this deal. I want to go. I want to see how it is. What can I lose? You know, that U.S. pilot, former U.S. Navy pilot or Air Force pilot, fighter pilot, he was hired by Chinese military to teach them tactics, train their pilots.
Right.
And he was.
Wait a minute, how is that legal?
Yeah.
No,
right.
he came to the U.S. He was arrested. He's been charged.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so
Okay.
the American went to China, trained them,
The guy.
came back and got arrested here.
Yeah, trained for 2 years, I think.
That's
He came
actually
back.
what I would have expected.
Not immediately, but eventually
Yeah.
he's arrested now. So that is China. They will use every opportunity. Anybody who wants to contribute, we will more than happy to pay you, whether you're Chinese or not, or American.
But yeah, to Vic's point, I definitely don't hate the player, I hate the game, right? Like anything about the stuff that I was talking about, it's not anti-China. It's like, but this is what's happening.
Yeah, I'm just telling you what's happening, that I know what's happening. And well, for me, especially military, business-wise, commercial-wise, it's probably an honest issue. Although IP is a relatively new concept, in the beginning of the human history, there's no such IP. If you speak English, I speak English from you, learn from you. I'm not violating anybody's IP. If you invented a new spear, and I copy it, I'm not inventing.
No, like, cause they would have guilds and stuff. Once something became very valuable, I think it was like glass in Venice or whatever. Like, there were things where like you couldn't leave if you were one of the people that had the craft to make it. You couldn't leave under like penalty of death because they wanted to protect the IP. Like,
I guess I'm tracing back a longer past.
oh yeah, if you go way back.
Imitation. I'm just saying from the very beginning. Imitation is the best. What's it called?
Form of flattery.
Flattery, yeah. And then probably Industrial Revolution, they invented this IP concept. I think it's better to protect some people, some businesses. That's relatively new. And China is relatively new to this industrial age. So IP for them is kind of new. But even when U.S. is developing their industry in the 1700s or 1800s, they copied a lot of British stuff.
Yes.
British copied German stuff, U.S. copied German stuff.
Yeah.
The IP is relatively new. Though we're talking commercially, right?
But even
and the military is a different level. Because the military is a business of killing people. What's it just stealing some information technology compared to killing people? It's nothing. It's totally moral and justified, at least from my country standpoint. So from IP, of course, if you want to join the global economy, you want to follow their institutions so people compete on the level playing field. Nobody feel they're stolen or like violated, right? Even with that, there's a lot of IP lawsuits between major companies.
I think even in human history, I think even before there were IP laws as we know them today, I think there at a certain critical mass of humanity, there was a point where like they realized, okay, I know something, I'm going to try to keep it for myself. So even though it's not an IP law, it's still like an understanding that I want to keep it a secret so that you don't get it. And
that's true. That's true. So probably human instinct will feel if you want to keep it. If you intend to keep it to yourself, and I happen to learn about it, and I use it for my benefit, it's kind of moral, my conscience, it's on my conscience. Right? So you're right, human nature still have a little bit of that. I'm not justifying Chinese, their action, the IP violation stuff.
In fact,
it's a kind of complex human activity.
I'm reading a book on the Silk Road right now, and weren't there things also even in like the times of the Silk Road, like, you know, obviously China had like a huge dominance in like making beautiful fabrics and stuff like that. Like, I'm pretty sure there were stuff like in the emperors at the time, like the silkworms or different things that could not leave. Under penalty of death, right? That's sort of like, I guess that's technically not IP, but it is like a means of production for something very important.
Yeah, strategic value. Oh yeah, so see it's all over the place. Well, under the IP is still the technology or the knowledge is all over the place. There's so much you can do. If it's really sought after, it's gonna spread, no matter what kind of penalty or kind of IP. But still, if you want to be a civilized nation, if you want to do business with all other nations, you need to follow the same rules, the same institution.
I just think people will always find a loophole too.
Well, of course, Apple's doing that to Samsung, Samsung doing it to Apple, and Google doing that to Amazon or something.
But are you following at all, Eric, like how Singapore is somehow being used as like a pass-through kind of thing for like China being able to use chips?
Sure, with us.
Right, there's all sorts of,
so
there's like all sorts of like, I need to research that some more, but it's, Singapore's kind of playing an interesting role in helping China.
Oh well,
with AI.
Singapore is I think one of the highest GDP per capita,
Yeah.
right? If not the highest. Well, they have to use every which way to accomplish that.
Because if you have ByteDance in Singapore, like, why can't they use all the chips and use,
Speaking of ByteDance, I'm recalling that they used to own TikTok.
Yeah.
And TikTok is no longer owned by ByteDance. TikTok is owned by, I think, I don't know. Like an investment consortium. Where like
Oracle's the biggest holder.
Like Oracle
Control.
and
20% or something.
And my understanding is that I don't know if he's the CEO now, but the guy who's associated with Oracle is a guy named Larry Ellison.
Oh yeah.
Right? And I could swear that like he has given money to a foreign military. I forget which one.
Is it that famous little country?
I'm getting older and my memory is
I think he has
failing me.
dual citizenship with that famous little.
Dual citizenship. Giving money to a foreign country.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, so it's somewhere in that area, I think. And I wonder, like, would that fly for? I don't want to keep
Iran.
or something. Yeah, we're getting closer.
Maybe in Singapore. That's a famous.
Warmer. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, like, why is that okay? But that's a whole different topic. But you mentioned the ByteDance.
Yeah.
More to the broader topic. I read. I don't remember what it was, where it was, or when it was. Like within the last few months, I read something. It was like a longer piece, like maybe a Substack or something, that was talking, or maybe it was a podcast. It was talking about. China, like, they are, like, heavy on strategy to get what they want, to the extent that open warfare is almost a failure of strategy. Like, if you are in a fight with an opposing country, you have failed strategy, right? And so, is China a threat? I mean, they have competing interests, and to the extent that they want to be very, very strategic, I suppose you could argue no. But if their strategy is precisely to undermine the decreasingly world hegemon United States, is that a kind of threat? I suppose you could say it is. And then it gets a little murkier and stuff, and it's hard for me to parse out, like, what do we mean by threat, and,
what's the definition of threat? In this
like, do I think that one of the things that this piece mentioned was that, like, Russia and China both, they don't want to see a collapse of the United States. They want to see stability. And a collapse in the United States would mean instability, reverberates, throughout the world probably. And so they wouldn't want to see a collapse. But what I bet they wouldn't be too unhappy about is if the United States were just continually dwindling and weakening and declining, so that the United States, maybe the threat from a country like China is the idea that the United States becomes less of a threat. I don't know. It's just some thoughts I have.
What China wants is, we don't have to get into a lot of abstract. What China wants today, I know why you
don't like abstract.
because we are real things to talk about. Right? Taiwan. China is hoping U.S. will not intervene. or bolster Taiwan's separatist movement. That's number one. If U.S. doesn't intervene if U.S. too weak militarily, China will breathe a sigh of relief. I don't think it's aggressive. It's just I want you to butt out my business. The only one thing I can make sure of that is to see you militarily not strong enough compared to me. So they will be happy about it, which means time is probably on China's side. Because in that neighborhood, China has superiority. Definitely today, yes, minus the nuclear aspect. But conventional, the recent years, 18 or even last count was 18, now it's probably even more. The independent think tank war game, China won all of them.
Yeah.
Like, look, what's the word for that? It's there's a one, but you win, but you suffer losses.
A Pyrrhic victory.
Pyrrhic victory. But China won all of them. I'm sure U.S. wouldn't think Taiwan's worth a loss, even though China suffered losses as well.
I'm pretty sure the American people.
So China wanted to make sure U.S. is not going to, or is not able to, or is not going to choke all those small passes around the world, the trade routes. So how did China do it? China built their own land routes. That's part of the actually initial motive for Belt and Road Initiative. They go to Eurasia landmass to reach Europe.
Yeah, it's logical.
And that's one thing, right? Because if U.S. thinks, well, if I blockade, risk all the political risk, even military risk, to blockade Malacca or whatever, only to China can rely certain percentage, not total replacement, certain percentage going through Kazakhstan, all the way to Italy, to Germany, to even Britain. Then my blockade is probably not worth the risk. I'm probably less likely to do it. That's what China wants. I don't have to fight you. I don't have to show my force to your face, but you're already less likely to do it. Because I have alternative. And it's not like I have no military. You still have to take a risk if you want to go that route. But you do a calculation, maybe it's not worth the risk. The China's objective is accomplished. You're not going to use force. I'm not going to use force. And I can be relatively free of restriction or under threat of being choked off. So that's a whole strategy, right? So without getting to like a generalized abstraction or abstract, with specific cases, China is able to find a way to do it, to accomplish goals normally military has to use military to accomplish. China has the incentive, or they have the wisdom, if you will, or strategic view to accomplish any ways less than other than the military.
And I can tell you what exactly was the Russian ones. And maybe that's exactly what the China wants as well about the United States. Russia wants that the United States play by the rules.
Yeah.
So they don't use the dollar as a weapon against everybody. So they don't enforce the sanctions on other countries. They don't start the wars against other countries. They don't change the regimes of other countries in there. So they just like play with the rules. I mean, we have rules.
You mean like the United States did in 2014 in Ukraine?
They did everywhere.
Yeah, that was
I mean,
when
I can
they
give you 100
Swiss,
places
right?
in there. They keep changing it. I mean, they keep changing everywhere in there. So,
Yeah.
so I mean, if everybody's cooperating, work together. Like even we're talking about, I mean, the whole idea we're working for the people. It's not about like, hey, I created this medicine for the cancer. I'm not going to give it to you. I mean, I'm just going to keep it for myself. And then I'm like, you're going to buy it $30,000 so I can sell it. No, we created it for everybody. It's like you created, shared with everyone. I mean, I know it's like even the latest like Russia come up with some vaccine from the cancer. They start testing it. They start sharing with everybody. Like China, you want it? Go ahead. You guys want it? Grab, test it. I mean, it's not just like, oh, I created it, it's mine. Now I'm going to make a lot of money from it. No, use it. So that's exactly how it's supposed to be, like microchips. I mean, one country is just like, hey, no, I'm not going to give it to you because you're going to use it for your advantage. What? No, just share it with everyone. I mean, we work for the same common goal. It's for advancement of the humanity. So what's the problem? Like, why do we want to, like, why we partition the world and like, this is mine, this is yours, I mean, we're the enemies, I mean, so it's kind of like, no, work together. And usually United States, it's kind of like they created a system where they're the boss, they're the top, and everybody working for them. And the small countries, they're being abused pretty much. They have like no choice. Because it's like, you cannot go against the United States, because you're gonna get destroyed. So,
Small countries get abused. There is one country that it's actually the reverse.
They know jiu-jitsu.
Huh?
They know jiu-jitsu. They have the leverage.
I mean, I can.
Jiu-jitsu, Krav Maga, one of those.
Krav Maga is probably.
I mean, I have my idea why they're helping Israel in there, but it's like a different story in there. So, but that was my idea in there. About the threat about the China. Yes, it is a huge threat for the United States, especially for their system, because their system is built on the U.S. dollar. And like they were saying in the 1970s, they actually started the trading the oil, so that everybody started using the dollar. Plus, they needed something like, because the United States at that time, they actually was the biggest producer, they had a lot of manufacturers, but they were too small. They needed to expand for the global in there. So plus it was getting too expensive in the United States to keep all the manufacturers. So they actually found a good place in China. They had a lot of like people in there. I mean, they're like, the labor was cheap. Plus the China provided whatever, like all the incentives for all those businesses. So they moved everything there. So the China started selling all of that. I mean, the U.S. owned all of that, and they were selling for dollars. So now they were able to sell not only the oil, but all the goods and service, whatever. So now it lasted for so much time. China worked like slaves, whatever, like just for pennies and stuff like that. They built some money in there. They invested in their own infrastructure, and then in 2013, this is when Xi Jinping came, and he said even though the United States was probably hoping for the different guy. So the guy they were able to control, but this guy they couldn't control, and then whenever he came, he said, you know what? Now we're gonna just we're just gonna care about our own country. So that's why he actually the Silk Way. So we're gonna create our own goods, and we're gonna sell it our own way through that Silk Way.
Belt and Road.
So and this was a huge threat because now U.S. is just like they're losing China, with all the goods, whatever they're producing. So now the China will start selling for their own currency in there. So and now because of the oil as well, now because the China was buying oil straight from them, not using the dollar anymore. So now they're even using they're losing the money that they were making for the petrodollars. So like those two major things in there, they're losing. They cannot afford it because once it's lost, the dollar is going to disappear. And it's like for them, it's going to be a collapse. Without a dollar, it's a crash. That's it. Because they have nothing in there, they have nothing against against the world. They have no more leverage against all the countries in there anymore. So.
But isn't that ultimately the demise of any country that's like a reserve currency, right? Like that happened to the UK before the USA, right? Because they have to become a net importer. Like it's kind of like the kiss of death. Right?
That's why yeah.
I think, Kelvin, you should tell us the joke, and then after
Right.
that, we'll wrap it up since we're about to get kicked out of the library.
High point.
Good one. Thank you, Kelvin. So yeah, that concludes our meeting. Great discussion, everyone. And till next time, thank you so much.